Coming to you live from the studios of KMUD. This is Heroes and Patriots. Today is Thursday, April 4th, 2024. It's 9 a.m. in the West and 12 noon in the East, and we thank you for joining us from wherever you're tuning in. I'm Mary Massey in Northern California. My co-host John will be calling in from the East. Presently, he's on a train. So today's program will be archived here at kmud.org, of course at Facebook and YouTube, and our program website, heroespatriots.org. As always, we invite you to join into the in-with conversation with questions on topic at 707-923-3911. And as she mentioned, our engineer today is Dorothy Schaefer. So we thank Dorothy and KMUD for hosting this program. For the next hour or so, we will be talking about dark money. In past shows, we've talked about the various ways in which dark money is given and spent, from election campaigns, paramilitary groups, or even illegal arms sales. But today we will visit dark money in another area, that being dark money in politics and education. Joining the program for the first time is our guest this morning, Maurice Cunningham, JD, PhD. He is the author of Dark Money and the Politics of School Privatization. He retired in 2021 from the University of Massachusetts at Boston, where he was Associate Professor of Political Science, and he continues to this day to research and write about dark money. He has many published commentaries appearing in the Progressive, Network for Public Education, and Counterpunch, to name a few. He joins us today from Cambridge, Mass., and we now welcome him to the program. Maurice Cunningham, thank you for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure, Mary. Thanks for having me.
We are so delighted that you are with us, and John is somewhere in your neck of the woods, but not sure where. So hopefully he'll join us in for the conversation. But as I mentioned at the beginning, dark money seems to enter many sectors in our lives. And usually we think about it with respect to presidential or election campaigns in the forms of super PACs. Large amounts of money come from very wealthy people who have an interest in the outcome of those elections. But you have spent a good bit of your professional life, your teaching life, looking at the politics and dark money in education. Let's mention your new book, or your book. I don't know how recent it was released, but Dark Money and the Politics of School Privatization. It may be the best place for us to begin. So for our listeners, what does this book address? And why do you feel it had to be written?
Well, it addresses both aspects of dark money that I think of are that used in political campaigns, which we mentioned, but that used well before any political campaign begins or anything is put on the ballot in the form of nonprofit giving. So funds go through very wealthy people will contribute sometimes to a fund with what is called a DAF. It allows the actual giver to remain hidden, donor advised funds, and the donor advised fund will then give money to, say, a Moms for Liberty, a Parents Defending Education, a National Parents Union. It makes it impossible to trace where that money was coming from. So I really got involved in this about 10 years ago when a campaign was happening in Massachusetts to place charter schools on the ballot. I didn't follow education. I didn't know anything about charter schools. But the Boston Globe did an article saying, well, at the time I was studying Massachusetts politics, and the Boston Globe ran an article that said the pro-charter side will put $15 million into this ballot campaign. And I thought, who has that kind of money? Nobody has. That's a record. Nobody's ever spent that kind in Massachusetts. Who has that money? And then I found out they sure as hell weren't going to tell us. So I set to figuring it out, and that became the book. which is largely about that campaign and what preceded that campaign, but includes national materials as well. And it's all about how they put this together. They eventually wound up spending 25 million in the campaign and got beat by the unions, which spent about 15 million. They got beat because people hated their ideas. Basically, there's only so much that much money can do. But in the 2 years before that, they spent about $10 million siphoning it through nonprofits, and this was all in the support of the charter campaign as well. And so these interest groups that are funded by nonprofits, they are real interest groups. Everybody would say they are trying to achieve a public policy goal, but there's really no monitoring of the spending behind it. And so that's a big part of the book as well. And I've carried this forward. The book was sort of about what I would call neoliberal organizations funded by Gates and others, that seem to center their efforts in helping underserved urban communities. And then along comes Moms for Liberty, which is as blatantly a white backlash operation as you could find. And so things changed dramatically right after I published the book. But I've been following them and similar groups ever since.
Well, tell me, of this 25 million in this campaign, how was it spent? What did it go for? Did it reach its goal? And then you had the unions with their 15 million. How did all that play out?
The 25 million went largely, it fattened the wallets of a lot of consultants who got to play in there,
Oh,
particularly media consultants. It was raised, about half of that was raised from 5 or 6 people. So you had people putting 2 million, 2.5 million into this thing. There was really nothing to them. They're billionaires or very close to being billionaires. So about half of that 25 was raised from 5, 6 people, and much of the rest of it was raised from other people who could also chip in. A mere 250,000 or 500,000 or something like that, barely registered. It was because that side really had very little public support when it came down to it. They spent a lot of money on paying for people to go door to door canvassing. Now the unions did some of that too, and the unions had, for $15 million, were able to put on a pretty good media campaign as well, a very good media campaign. But the key difference was that people trusted teachers. So if you would get your door knocked on by somebody for the pro charter side, and you'd say, "Well, I don't know. I don't think I have this problem with it." And the person, this actually happened. Another scholar was hanging around with them, and the person at the door would say, "I don't know. I have this objection to it," and the canvasser would say, "Yeah, that's a pretty good idea. I think that's right," because they were just collecting a paycheck. They didn't care about it.
were
Whereas
they?
Whereas the teachers could actually convey from a
Yeah.
trusted source why charters were bad for our communities, and the teachers union side won 62 to 38, overwhelming victory. They had the governor at the time, Charlie Baker, was for pro charters. He was the most popular governor in the country. The Boston Globe, the major source of news up here in Massachusetts, was in favor of charters. So there were so many factors going on, and yet when you put it on the ballot and people got to hear both sides, they rejected charters. And this happens with vouchers all the time too. They don't put these things on the ballot anymore because they know people will rise up and beat them.
What are the one or two things that voters really didn't like about this? Was it because we had people from outside the Boston area or Massachusetts contributing? Was it their wild ideas? What led to the failure, do you think?
The major factor was that the unions emphasized that the funding charter schools would take money away from the 95% of children who are going to our public schools.
Oh, wow.
And they hammered that away. They were very precisely said, this is how much, 470 million or whatever it was, I forget the exact figure. This is how much it'll cost year to year. That money will be taken away from the kids, your kids who are in public schools, and sent off to these private organizations who aren't accountable. So who was funding it played a small role in the union's campaign, but they just continually focused on this is what we're being taken away from your children's education. This is this is money that can fund the arts. This is money that can fund all the things we love about public schools. Um,
Right.
and you have teachers actually relating this, and it was a very effective campaign.
What was the charter school offering? If the public schools are good schools, they have the arts, they have a well-rounded curriculum. What were they offering in place of that?
They were arguing that in Massachusetts, at least, that charters outperform public schools. Well, some charters do, and some charters don't, and they couldn't overcome that campaign from the union side. But that's what they were promoting, was basically saying, this will help. This is a boon to children throughout the state. Now, one thing they did that turned out to be a mistake on the pro charter side is they uh, they didn't target it, so they made it as if you could open a charter in any community. And the suburbs where the schools are, well funded by property taxes and so forth,
Yeah.
were rising up against this, saying, "Oh God, no, we don't want this. We don't want them coming taking money from our very good schools." So there was some self interest involved in there as well. But really, and, early on in the year, that you would have polls out and say, "Oh, this charters are very popular." But as people learned more and more about what charters would do to public schools, there was a great reaction against it. It was a very good campaign.
And did they define doing better, excelling more as getting into a better college? How did what were the measurements?
It's very much tied to high stakes testing. We have in Massachusetts
Okay.
something called the MCAS, which may go on the ballot this year. The unions are trying to put repeal of that on the ballot this year. We're one of only 8 states that still has that, and such tests have been used to pummel teachers and so forth. They're not well understood by the public, and it's the sort of a thing. The score levels can be used to pummel students. Now, it's also, educators have been stuck kind of teaching to the test all these years,
Right.
which means you get less music, you get less arts, you get less innovation in teaching. And so, but ultimately, the test scores were what Charlie Baker and the pro charter side was saying, here's the measure, we can all do better than this. And it was heartily rejected because the other side had a much better case, frankly.
Wow. It's 13 minutes past the hour. If you're listening, this is Heroes and Patriots. I'm Mary Massey, and I'm speaking with Maurice Cunningham. He is the author of Dark Money and the Politics of School Privatization, which is essentially charter schools. We're speaking right now about the efforts and campaigns in the Boston area, but let's look maybe a little more broad. So you can use that as an example. Who is involved with the dark money? How is it passed through, and where does it end up? And then how do we find out about it?
Um, well, there are a number of foundations that do it. The Walton Family Foundation is probably one of the biggest. Charles Koch has gotten into K through 12 in the last few years.
Wow.
Dick Uihlein, who's sometimes called the Koch of the Midwest, he's the largest giver to conservative causes out of the Midwest. And so there are a number of billionaires who have decided that they would like, over the democratic process, they would like to institute their beliefs, and they spend wildly. So, for example, um, the Walton Family Foundation funds something called the National Parents Union. That I can tell you, another neoliberal group, by the way, which I can tell you is not national, is not parents, and is not a union. Other than that, the name is a perfect representation of who they
So it's a
are.
shell.
It's a shell.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
essentially, but they claim to represent parents. Koch and Walton, through another foundation they have, they equally fund something called the Vila Education Foundation. It's not run by an educator; it's run by one of Koch's oil and gas people, and they've contributed to National Parents Union. So you see, and there are groups like, you turn to Parents Defending Education, for example, a right wing white backlash group. Very clear Koch ties with that. The famous or infamous Moms for Liberty, funded by a woman named Julie Fancelli, who's a billionaire Publix supermarket heiress, has also funded 3 to 6 million of January 6th rallies. She's put
Oh,
money
wow.
in. Uline has given money to them. So it's pretty clear that there's a lot of right wing sources. Bradley Impact Fund, a right wing foundation out of out of Milwaukee has funded Parents Defending Education. By the way, you can see these are sort of familiar names to, I bet, a lot of people,
Right.
because we know they're funding. They're funding climate denial. They're funding anti-health care. They're
Right.
funding the cutting of the ACA. They were front and center in trying to get people, because their workers weren't coming to work during COVID, so they were front and center in denial of masks, in denial of vaccines, and so forth. So you see this, when you look at the money, you tend to see the same people over and over again.
So, okay, they have the money. How do they get it through the system? How is it tracked, or is it? And then how do voters find out about it?
Well, there were a couple of different IRS sanctioned legal organizations that many upright, fine nonprofits use. They're 501c3 and a 501c4. So Moms for Liberty, for example, is a 501c4. Very, very hard to trace the money that goes
Well, what
into
does
it.
that mean? We all are familiar with 501c3. For our listeners, what is
Yeah.
a 501c4?
A 501c4 is different than a C3. It's called a social welfare organization. It has far more capacity than a C3 to engage in electoral politics. It's also not tax deductible, so some rich
Oh,
people would rather not have do that. But Moms for Liberty is largely a C4, and the contributions to C4s don't show up in IRS disclosures. So it's very hard to tell. Now, Moms for Liberty also has a smaller C3, and so that's traceable. But even a C3, there are ways to find out who's giving to a C3, but it's very late. So, for example, the 2022 publicly available Form 990s that tell
right.
you what a group is raising, and then you
Right.
can piece together who's giving it to them. The 2022 Form 990s don't become available until November 2023. So it's already a year old. And
Yeah.
now we won't get another disclosure for 2023 until the end of this year. So that's bad. That's hard to. And then, the disclosure, you look for Moms for Liberty C3, for example, it won't disclose who gave them a $100,000 gift. You have to then go to ProPublica or other sources. ProPublica is a really good one, and find out who's been giving to them. So it's really a detective job. It's a lot of work, and sometimes these funds just get hidden. For example, if Donors Trust gives $1 million to Moms for Liberty or Parents Defending Education, for example, this is an example. Um, That'll show up in Donors Trust tax return, but what won't show up is who gave them the $1 million. Who gave the
Oh,
$1 million to Donors Trust? It's
sure.
frequently used by the Koch network, but it's used by others. So you don't really know who the ultimate source of that money is, and we never will know.
Nonprofits, typically 501c3s, have to file an annual report
Yeah.
for their members, their boards, for the community. Is that required of a C4?
Um, Tax returns are C4s. I've seen them published. I'm not sure if it's required or not. If they're if they're smart, they're not always smart, because I sometimes read those and come up with some real gem information. But if they're smart, they won't do that. Now, I've actually had organizations put things in their annual reports, and then I write about it, and lo and behold, the next annual report, that information is dropped. So I know they're noticing.
Wow. And the mission statement of these groups that basically are funneling money,
Yeah.
um, you know, these how do they what is their mission? What do they publish as their
Yeah.
mission? And then tell us what the real agenda is.
Yeah, oh, they're often cheerful, upbeat things, stand for liberty and the rights of parents and so forth, in the case of Moms for Liberty and Parents Defending Education. But what they really are is funding interest group activity on behalf of those who would like to decimate and eradicate unions, who would like to destroy public education and take it down.
Hmm.
For example, I mean, it's the education is part of the 900 plus page Heritage report probably some folks have heard about already. It calls for eventually doing away with the Department of Education, doing away with public education. But Heritage is a part of another secretive organization called the Council for National Policy. And I like this example because Council for National Policy did not take 900 pages to do it. In 2017, they wrote to Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump and saying, you need to do away with public education to be replaced with, and these are your options, to be replaced with for-profit schools, religious schools, and homeschooling. That's it.
Oh,
That's what you'd replace it with. And, CNP talks a lot about our Judeo-Christian traditions and so forth. So basically, they'd be Christian evangelical schools or, for-profit schools or homeschooling. That's it. No public schooling. That's their vision. And so they want to eradicate public education. And obviously, this is a pretty unpopular idea. So they couch it in other terms of parents' rights and so forth. It has nothing to do with parents' rights at all. It has to them controlling the education of young people.
wow. Talk about inclusivity and exclusivity. If these are, I would say, elite charter schools, you have the option of going to religious school or a charter school or a homeschool.
Yeah.
Talk about the people, the teachers on the ground, the students in the classroom that are involved in public schools right now.
Yeah.
That's a wide variety of backgrounds and languages and cultures, and doesn't sound like I'm getting that from a charter school. Is that unfair? Is that unfair?
No, I think it's very fair. Let me also add that it's not just charters. If you look at what's happening in quite a few red states, where in particular Betsy DeVos, with all her money, has been influential through her PAC and so forth, they push vouchers. And vouchers are just, it's a terrible form of education,
Tell us how that works for our listeners who might know know what a voucher is and how it works through the system.
This would again, and it has been a very effective scheme in a number of red states, Arizona and Idaho and New Hampshire and elsewhere, where vouchers are made available. So you can, as a parent, take whatever it is, $6,000, and you can use that as that goes to your child's education. The state, instead of providing the money to your local school, provides it to you. And you can go out and find another educational option, one of which might be, so it might be a private school. Might be what's happened with these is, in fact, where they've been implemented, what's happening is people who are already in private schools are opting in for the voucher, basically subsidizing their private education that they were already getting. And so it's a phenomenon. It's a giveaway. It's a giveaway to people who already have money. And what DeVos and others love about it is it takes money away from public schools. So it drains our public schools of their funding, which is what they're after. They want to bring down public schools. So it's kind of a win-win for them. It rewards many of their upper middle class constituents, and it drains money from public schools. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that groups like this, Koch and the others, do not want to pay taxes to educate other people's children, right? They don't want to pay taxes for any sort of service that the rest of us use, but education is a huge part of any state's budget, and they do not want their taxes going to this, and they certainly don't want their taxes going to improving education. That is a big no-no for them.
Wow, that is interesting. If you just joined us, it's 24 minutes past the hour. This is Heroes and Patriots. You have a chance to speak with our guest, Maurice Cunningham, at 707-923-3911. Today we're talking about dark money, and not necessarily in the way that our program has covered it in the past. We're talking about how dark money influences boards of education and the effects of dark money on school kids, teachers' unions, and so forth. And I wanted to shift gears a bit. You brought up Moms for Liberty, and I was looking back. It happened about a year ago in Florida.
Yeah.
And then candidate for president DeSantis and his wife were handpicking members of Moms for Liberty, and we kind of have gotten a little bit of a sense of who is in Moms for Liberty. But they were handpicking members to sit on boards of education, to design curriculum, to advocate policy, and some of that was we heard on our previous program, Don't Say Gay, of course,
Right.
in the classroom, removing books, you know, that they decided were not appropriate or for whatever reason. And, you know, and well, let's just react to that. How did that play out? Where is it today? And is there a life for that kind of thing?
Well, it certainly had a good strong run at the beginning. You know, first of all, these are Moms
Brandy?
for Moms for Liberty is a top-down driven part of a network of right-wing extremist groups. So they're kind of born in 2021, and they burst on the scene, and uh, their co-founder was on Rush Limbaugh in the first month, and then they're in Breitbart and Daily Caller and Daily Signal and on Fox, and they're off and running, and then the mainstream media picked it up. So they kind of had a very quick start based on opposition to mass and closing schools and so forth. And they use things like, critical race theory that Chris Rufo has pushed to kind of angry people up and so forth. So they did have a burst. They certainly successfully got media attention. Their ability to communicate to command attention in the media has been substantial. They've had a couple of national summits where the last one was attended by 5 Republican presidential candidates. So they've had that going for them. But what has happened over time is, they've had some growth in membership, but independent studies of that growth have shown that it's not what they claim it is. And then their claims of winning school board elections have been found also by independent studies, Brookings Institute in particular, that they have overstated their wins in school board races in 2022, certainly in 2023, and we're seeing them reversed in spring school board races in 2024. So they are really, I think Brookings found that of candidates Moms for Liberty endorsed to put on their website, they won only 33% of those races last year. And they're winning them in places that are already deep red. So they're turning deep red school boards a little more red and extreme. But their electoral power has been shown to be waning, and probably because their brand name has become toxic. So let me explain a few reasons why that's happened.
Yeah, please.
One is, well, nothing right has happened for them since the 2023 summit, the first weekend in July. They went into that dealing with a big controversy where one of their chapters in Indiana in a newsletter quoted Hitler.
Oh.
And, yeah. And so that was, and Tiffany Justice, one of the co-founders, who was a very extreme person, gets up at the conference and says, there's a recording available of this, video available of this. She gets up in front of the conference and says, one of our moms in a newsletter quoted Hitler. I stand with that mom. To give you an idea.
Wow.
Well, that didn't go over particularly well, and there were plenty of protesters there, and so you move. But Washington Post and other media are giving them these phenomenal headlines. Moms for Liberty, new powerhouse of the GOP. That's the headline in July. Fast forward to November, and the headlines are like, Moms for Liberty annihilated in school board races because they didn't have the power on the ground. And very importantly, real community members, people who live in these communities whose kids go to the school, started organizing against them. And that was extremely effective. Organizing against Moms for Liberty has proven to be very good because people do not want extremism in their schools. So the school board candidates went down, and then they had one headline after another. One of their chapter heads got, arrested for shoplifting. The Philadelphia youth pastor turned out to have be on the sex offender registry. And then
Wasn't one of them involved in like 3-way sex? Am I wrong on that? That was
No, in November, there's a third co-founder. They really don't like to talk about her. She sort of left early on because it was so obvious. Her husband was the vice chair of the Florida Republican Party. Pretty obvious that that this was tied into the hierarchy of the Republican Party. But this one was one named Bridget Ziegler, and she's gone. Her husband was investigated. He was not charged. He was not charged, but he
I
was
mean, I can't see
investigated
him getting because,
for
I understand,
an attempted,
feel
was
that it's
accused of rape by a woman.
very
Wow.
touching.
That those he was investigated. He was not charged with that. He was then investigated for videotaping the encounter. He was not charged for that. But during the investigation, what came out was that he and his wife Bridget, Christian and Bridget Ziegler, had a threesome with this woman.
Yeah.
And now this is the woman who is a co-author of the Don't Say Gay law, who has tormented, attacked, and traumatized LGBTQ plus students. These are children, and she has had no problem attacking them. And guess what? Ha! Engaged in bisexual sexuality. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's a wonderful.
No, but she held herself out as the example of a pristine mom, and she had a Facebook group, and she told everybody how to raise their kids, and lo and behold, then we find out that she's into some kinky stuff, which is her right, but you're holding yourself out.
But not doing that and attacking LGBTQ plus children. That's just the hypocrisy reeks. And so that has been a part of it as well. And things have just kind of gone downhill from there. And I think anybody that can log on, you'll find this on the 60 Minutes website. 60 Minutes did a piece on book banning in Beaufort, South Carolina, and interviewed Tina Descovich and Tiffany Justice, the other two co-founders.
This is recent? Was this recent?
This is in the last 5 or 6 weeks. You can go back and find it. Scott Pelley interviewed the two of them, and he had the goods on them. He said, listen, you've accused schools of indoctrinating students into gender ideology. What do you mean by that? They couldn't answer. They had no answer. They don't know what they're. And you've accused teachers who teach LGBTQ plus issues or treat people with those children with respect. You've accused them of being groomers. What do you mean by that? And they were unable to answer that question.
Wow. What did they say? Did they say anything?
They changed the topic, and Pelley was not having it. Pelley did a great job interviewing them, and he kept bringing them back and saying, well, they wouldn't, and he said they wouldn't answer this. Now, since then, it's a huge humiliation, but they're almost impervious to being humiliated because Tiffany Justice has been attacking LGBTQ plus children and people who try to help them as groomers again since then. Especially in Oklahoma, when the next Benedict tragedy happened, she has resumed calling out people who are trying to help LGBTQ plus children. We know they have extra stresses in their lives. We know they're more likely to be in danger of committing suicide. And anybody who tries to help them, to Tiffany Justice, is a groomer. This is how extreme these folks are.
Not to wade too far into politics, do you think this whole fiasco in Florida sank or helped sink DeSantis from, running, becoming the nominee for the Republicans?
It didn't help. He really, I think he would have had, under any circumstances, he was going to have a hard time with Donald Trump. But clearly the whole woke, Florida is where woke goes to die business was a failure. It just didn't work. Even many Republican parents with kids in public schools are offended by it. And I think even he's saying he's gone so far. So recently I can't remember where he was speaking in Florida somewhere, and he said, "Well, man, the book banning thing. A few people, a few of the wrong kind of people have been objecting to these books. We need to pull back a little bit on it." So it's gone a little bit too far, even for DeSantis.
Well, they were even in the classroom trying to rewrite the history of slavery, which is an amazing aspect of this whole. We're going to control you. We want to control policy. We want to control your curriculum. We want to tell you what you can and cannot say. It's just astonishing.
That is the exact right word to use. It is very much about control. It is taking away children's rights and freedoms to a good education, to participate with each other, to be enlightened, to find their own true selves, and replace it with this sort of Christian white capitalist indoctrination, and that's exactly what they're about. You are right. Control over children is exactly what they are all about.
So we are now 36 minutes into our program, and I'm delighted to say that my co-host, John Sakowicz, who doesn't seem to be on a train, is joining us now. John, we're speaking with Maurice Cunningham. We've been talking about dark money in many rounds, but most specifically is how it's infiltrating our school system, our teachers' unions, the whole nine yards. And so I'd like to welcome you into the program and see if you have any questions that jump out to you right now.
Yes, thank you, Mary. I'm calling here from Baltimore Penn Station. I didn't want to call on the train because of a spotty signal. I want to thank Maurice for joining our show. I was going to ask him how all of this plays into the Trump campaign.
Well, I think certainly they depend on the Moms for Liberty to be foot soldiers in their campaigns. Now, this is something that Christian Ziegler, the since disgraced former chair of the Republican Party in Florida, he told the Washington Post. He said, I've been trying to get 20 to 30-year-old women involved in the Republican Party for years, and I haven't been able to do it, and Moms for Liberty has done it for me. So they are trying to do that. I think in their little heart of hearts, many of them really hope for DeSantis to be the nominee. But Moms for Liberty, for example, has 501c4s, which can be politically active, chapters in, well over 100 locations across the country. So you can activate those, and you can activate these people to be involved in GOP politics. And I think that's a good part of what will be available to Trump. He can tap these people. He spoke to their convention, their annual summit last year. That was, panded to them. And by the way, let me say this about Moms for Liberty. What group of fine, upstanding, suburban, upper middle class white Christian women, right, think that their brief to protect children is to invite to their national conference as a summit speaker a guy who we know has committed rape, who has said the most incredibly sexist things about grab them by, and so forth. And this is their example of somebody we should bring into the community. What group of moms would invite such a person to speak to them as an example? The whole thing is just crazy.
Maurice, as a follow-up question, when I emailed you, you perhaps rightly asked me, what is having you as a guest on the show what's the connection to national security? And I shot back that Trump is probably our biggest threat to national security. And in fact, the Biden campaign is making an issue out of Trump being a danger to democracy. Do you want to speak on the point that it's not just Trump that's a danger to democracy? It's these shadow groups that support him, be it these moms or be it these patriot groups, etc.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think if you look what's happening on the right, we were talking earlier about the 900-page Heritage report on what they plan to do. The next Republican president, they hope Trump, should be doing on day one, and it is to dismantle government and dismantle our national security apparatus. You can see the favoritism they show to Putin already. It's extremely dangerous, and so Heritage sort of impliedly makes the case that we had Trump for 4 years, but he wasn't really ready to govern. And so here's a whole plan to do it. I mean, he may not be terribly competent himself, but we're going to place people in these positions and carry out our policy, including policies in the national security area, which is very, very important to them, very much tilting toward Russia, and very much pulling out of NATO, which has been enormously successful in keeping the peace in Europe for these many decades. So it's a very dangerous time, and not just for education, for national security, for the survival of Medicare and Social Security, for the survival of Obamacare, all these issues. But certainly national security is right up there with all of them.
Morris and John, we have a caller on topic. Caller, if you're listening, what is your question for Morris?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on the topic of Bridget Ziegler and her organization there in Florida. She's on the Sarasota school board, and they voted by 4-1 vote for her to resign from that school board. And of course, she was the only person on the board who voted that she should stay on the board. And it's not just that, of course, she's a typical hypocritical, low IQ, wannabe Fox News host there with her bleached blonde hair. She's not the brightest person, and obviously she's going to be hypocritical against other adults, talking about their sex lives and how they're going to burn in hell while she's having a three-way with her rapist husband and some other lady. But she's attacking children for the so-called crime of being gay in Florida. And we all know how many people at young ages attempt and sometimes do succeed in committing suicide because they're treated that way by people like the Zieglers. Sieg Heil's Zieglers, great job. And by the way, they remind me of Jerry Falwell Jr. We all know Jerry Falwell Jr., right? And his wife and the pool boy. It's always these far right-wing so-called religious Christian fundamentalists and evangelicals who are the biggest sex freaks in the room, but they're pointing their finger at everybody else. The Zieglers make me sick.
So what is your particular question for Morris?
Well, my question is, why do we have to listen to any of these people at all? I mean, why is it that their opinions should be considered even relevant or valid, other than the fact that they get elected in some deep red ruby district in Florida and get on Fox News? Other than that, who cares what they have to say?
Right. Thank you, caller. Let's let Morris. You want to weigh in on their presence in our lives, and what should we do?
Sure. No, I kind of empathize in a way, but there's a long history of right wing activism in schools. There's a guy, Adam Latz, Lats, has written 4 historical episodes in the last century. Beginning with the Scopes monkey trial and so forth, where the right has become energized and involved in school policy. So we do hear them, and they're amplified. Bridget Ziegler, for example, after she won her last school board race, was then hired by something called the Leadership Institute to be their vice president for school board trainings. Leadership Institute even opened an office in Sarasota for her to work out of. And Leadership Institute has been around for 40 plus years. It trains right-wing activists in campaign tactics. And so you have this vast infrastructure that is behind them. Yeah, I mean, we rightly focus on Bridget Ziegler and Tiffany Justice and Tina Descovich as the sort of faces of this operation. But behind them, I mean, you want to know the most important mom is in Moms for Liberty? It's a guy named Morton Blackwell, who's 82 years old and has been around so long he was a Goldwater delegate.
Wow.
Now, why do I say that? Because it's Morton Blackwell that founded the Leadership Institute. And it's his operation. He does the trainings. Not personally, but his staff does the trainings. Right. It's their operation. And so behind the scenes, they even gave, the moms at the National Summit last year gave their, they had a Liberty sword. It looks like something that was left over from a Monty Python skit. But they gave this Liberty sword as an award to who? Morton Blackwell. Because he's been involved from the beginning, because you don't create this with 3 moms sitting around a kitchen table who've never done it before. You create it with people who know how to put things together like that, and that's Morton Blackwell, Leadership Institute, Heritage Foundation, which has been around for over 40 years as well. Those are the real powers behind Moms for Liberty. Moms for Liberty is an obedient franchise of larger right-wing organizations.
John, did you have a question, or is that your train announcement? I don't know if we've lost him or not. It's 45 minutes.
I'm here, Mary. No, this is horrifying. I'd like to know from Morris how regular parents can fight this. Short of organizing our own anti-Moms for Liberties organizations, what can we do? I mean, should we be running for the school board? How do we monitor curriculum? How do we monitor the conduct of teachers, etc.?
Yeah, we don't have to create our own organizations, although people are creating them all over the country, but they are now in existence to fight Moms for Liberty. Wonderful national organizations. Stop Moms for Liberty out of Florida is active nationally. A very good operation. Defense of Democracy. Just regular moms who took up this cause and are being very successful. Red, Wine, and Blue, get the wine in there, which very self-consciously says, no, we're the real suburban moms. And Red, Wine, and Blue is very effective, very professional. And if you go to their websites, Red, Wine, and Blue, Defense of Democracy, Stop Moms for Liberty, there's all kinds of material there on how to organize yourself. There's materials there on how to run for school board. But parents should take advantage of these sorts of things, and organizing your own committee. In Bucks County, Pennsylvania, there was a MAGA Moms for Liberty school board majority. In the last election, they were tossed out because people organized against them. So appreciate your teachers. When school board members, you see a school board member, thank them. They're doing their best job. Go to school board meetings, speak up for them. And you will find that this is very, very effective. So join with each other in the community, because it's been extremely effective at beating Moms for Liberty on the ground. They don't have a great ground game. They don't.
Mary, I want to get another quick question in. So we talked about school boards. How about library boards, our local public libraries? Who monitors, what goes on in our local public libraries?
Yeah, that's another matter. PEN America has done a great job on this. It's an organization that fights for the free speech rights of authors and to communicate. And so, it's very important. Library boards are another thing. Your school librarian, thank them. I mean, I was in a call in Maine last year with a librarian in a rural area who would get to school every day and wait for the school resource officer to come out to her car and walk her into school. She was so afraid. So people are being intimidated. They are spreading fear and disruption, and that's all they do well. So people have to join together and protect their librarians, protect their school board members, their principals and administrators, and their teachers. I'm telling all the time that I get in the education space. I say to the teachers and the school boards and administrators, I say, sometimes of course you're on opposite sides. You have you have a lot of conflict, but on this issue you have to realize that they are trying to destroy all of you. They are trying to destroy public education in its entirety. And we all have to join together and fight for the right of our children, the freedom of our children to get a good, decent education.
Maurice, we have about 10 minutes left. And excuse me, I'm curious to know how the media, print, electronic, cable news, etc., have they been diligent about accurately portraying these very right-wing conservative groups with respect to how they're trying to control our children and what they learn and the teachers that do it? Or have they just kind of looked the other way?
I wish I could say they were as neutral as looking the other way. It has been, the mainstream coverage has largely been an abomination.
Mm-hmm.
Moms for Liberty, for example, and other kind of organizations, Parents Defending Education Support, they come out of the box in 2021, and they're immediately taken up by right-wing media. Now we know that that's a propaganda network, and that's what they're going to do. But then you get like a few months in, and I'll give you an example. My favorite horrifying example. Washington Post does a piece on Moms for Liberty in October of 2021. So they're 10 months old. And it's a big puff piece on them. And they run a picture. I know we're on radio. I wish I could show this. They run a photo.
Go look.
They run a photo of Tina Descovich, one of the co-founders. And she is wearing kind of a white jacket and slacks, kind of open. She looks like she's pulling her jacket open, kind of like Superman coming out of the phone booth, and reveals the T-shirt that has their slogan on it, right? Up to the left of her is an American flag, and she is bathed in a cone of light. There's like a halo around her. it's the most ridiculous photo I've ever seen. And I wish I could say that was the worst of the coverage, but it continued on right through their national convention. In the last few months, it's gotten a little more critical. And what I'm really hoping is that other media, and I know they're still, New York Magazine is interviewed and so forth, is going to take the same tack as Scott Pelley did in 60 Minutes, saying, you keep calling teachers groomers. What do you mean by that?
Wow.
Okay, defend that comment because it is an indefensible comment. They've gotten away with it for 3 years, and it shouldn't be happening. So I hope the media will sit there and take a lesson from Scott Pelley of 60 Minutes because he did a terrific job. And I might add, in that episode of 60 Minutes about school bannings, there were 97 books at issue in Beaufort, South Carolina, a pretty conservative place. And after a year, 146 volunteers read all these books, and 92 of them went back on the shelf.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
We're down to about 7 minutes, and we would be remiss if we didn't direct folks to your book and also to your, almost advocacy, if you will. You've been a bit of an activism on this point. Hooray. And we would like to have listeners who are interested in this topic, who are interested in learning about how dark money is influencing all of our children. How can they do that? Where would they start? And what have I left out?
The network, in addition to the operations I've mentioned that fight Moms for Liberty, I would say that the Network for Public Education is outstanding. It is led by Dr. Diane Ravitch, who was, I think, an assistant secretary of education in the Bush administration, of all things. And then she, over her studies, her candid studies, realized that charters weren't working, and she has become an absolutely wonderful advocate for public education. So I would say the Network for Public Education. Again, I can't emphasize strongly enough the local nature, the importance of being involved locally, of knowing what's going on in your school board and standing up for those school board members and organizing, because the other side is trying to organize. Their problem is they have another reason for dark money is they just have darn unpopular ideas, and the only thing that can make it unpopular is if we know who's behind it: Charles Koch and the Waltons and the rest of it, and Dick Uihlein. And so, educate yourself as well as you can. Get into, have vibrant school board races in which real candidates who care about the community have differing opinions. That's great. It's what American democracy is supposed to be all about. But we need to organize against the people who are trying to destroy public education. Do that in your own community. Network for Public Education, Red, White, and Blue, Defense of Democracy, Stop Moms for Liberty. They can show you how to do it in your own community. And it's necessary that we all do this. And
it sounds like there's a model there from the teachers' unions across the country that they have pushed back, they've organized.
The NEA and AFT have done a great job nationally. It was AFT that exposed, fought really hard against Moms for Liberty last year, and at the same time, AFT was keeping track of their races, so they immediately were able to go to the press and say, "Hey, listen, 80% of these races we won." So the unions are much more effective. They've been doing this for kind of thing for a while, and they understand the stakes. So I mentioned, I think teachers, administrators, school board members, make sure to support your union in your community. This is vitally important. Unions are the really only hope we have to fight democratically for our values. So support those unions in your community. It's very important.
John, any final question or thoughts?
Yeah, I'm here in Baltimore for the 50th year class reunion at Johns Hopkins, and I'm going to make it my business while I'm here on campus to meet each of the officers for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that would be arts and sciences, that would be engineering, that would be the medical campus, that would be Bloomberg School of Public Health. So I think higher education has got a good model insofar as there are spread across campus officers for diversity, equity, and inclusion that are charged with the oversight of exactly what we've been talking about today. I pray that this filters down to high school and elementary schools throughout the United States as well. I want to thank our guests very much for being on our show, and I want to thank KMUT for bringing shows like this, shows that are important to parents and to their kids. So thank you, KMUD.
Thank you, John. Maurice, what's our final word for the day?
Well, I think John touched upon it that when he mentioned DEI, because it's under attack at the college level in Florida and Texas and other places. All these things are the final word for the day is all of these things are related. The things we've talked about: anti-education, anti-union, anti-climate, climate denialism. They're all coming from the same sources. The good news is we can beat them. Okay, and we do consistently beat them, but we have to be organized. We have to support each other, and on my end, support, as I said, support public education because it is under threat.
And here's a man who's retired, John, and look what he's up to. It's great. So our guest today has been Maurice T. Cunningham. He is JD PhD and the author of Dark Money and the Politics of School Privatization. And he's a pretty good expert on right-wing parents' rights group. So we want to thank you so much for being our guest today, and we hope that you've stirred some hearts to take up the mantle and pursue this.
Very much my pleasure.
All right.
Nothing could be more important than our children and their education. Thank you very much, Maurice.
You're welcome. Take care.
So that is our show today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Our next program will be the 1st and 5th Thursday. We have 2 programs in May, and we hope that you will join us from 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific time. And again, I would like to echo John's comments about thanking KMUD, our engineer Dorothy, and all the board members, volunteers, membership, everyone that's involved with the station. Because of them, we're able to bring this kind of programming to you. So have a good day, happy spring, and we will talk with you next time.
Thank you. Thanks.